Well, praise the Lord, everybody. We're going back to our third lesson on Joseph. When we last left Joseph, he was receiving word that he was getting out of the prison house. Solomon wrote in Proverbs, "Man's goings are of the Lord. How can a man then understand his own way?" And today we're going to look at how God knows the way, and that we should be faithful to him and to trust him, because we know that he will order our steps. Our focus verse today is Genesis 41, and we'll be reading verses 38 through 40. And Pharaoh said unto his servants, "Can we find such a one as this is, a man in whom the Spirit of God is?" And Pharaoh said unto Joseph, "Forasmuch as God hath showed thee all this, there is none so discreet and wise as thou art. Thou shalt be over my house, and according unto thy word shall all my people be ruled. Only in the throne will I be greater than thou." So we see here Joseph is rewarded as he comes out of heaven, or out of jail. One wonders how we would react. We must remember Joseph's life. He was shown dreams. He was given visions. And instead of getting rewarded, it just seemed to get him further and further in trouble. Ever since his first dream in Genesis 37, all the way up until Genesis 41, where we read he's elevated, many things transpired in Joseph's life, and rewards usually was not the result of it. How would we behave? How would we act? Here we know we have something good to say. We want to help others, but instead of reaping benefits of good choices, we seem to suffer the consequences of an ill fate. Many years had passed from the promise to the reality, and we would do well to heed and see how Joseph handled himself. For in each case, he never seemed to get bitter. He never seemed to want to lash out. He may not have understood all that was going through, but he did know the God whom he served. He remembered the stories of the God of Abraham, of Isaac, and his father Jacob. In this particular set of scriptures, we would read early on, the Pharaoh had two dreams, both of them back to back. The first, we read about 7 well-fed cattle that come out of the Nile, eating, enjoying life, only to see 7 ravenous cattle come forth and devour those 7 well-fed. But rather than becoming fat themselves, they once again become gaunt. A disturbing dream, for the Pharaoh was considered in that time almost like a demigod, and yet he did not understand what was going on. The source of their life, the Nile, was putting forth 2 seemingly opposing views. Good fed cattle that are drinking from its banks only to be eaten by that which was starved. He soon got a second dream. This time it was with ears of corn. 1 corn with 7 ears. It was good, and yet all of a sudden 7 withered corn comes up and devours. It disturbed him so much that in Genesis 41:8 it says, "And it came to pass in the morning that his spirit was troubled, and he sent and called forth all the magicians of Egypt, all the wise men thereof, and Pharaoh told them his dream, but there was none that could interpret it unto Pharaoh." How interesting it is to note, even before the Exodus situation, here is their demigod, disturbed, unable to understand those things, and none of his wise men, his magicians, or any but one around that was there revered as wise, knowing what happened. Let us go to the other side. Joseph languishes in prison. We knew that there was a butler and a baker that were put in prison with him, the Pharaoh's men. Each of them also had dreams, and each of them received their dream interpretation through Joseph. And Joseph had only one request, that when they were to be released, think on me when it shall be well, and when kindness is showed. I pray thee, make mention of me unto Pharaoh, and bring me out of this house. Each one received their so-called freedom. The butler to be put back in charge, the baker then to be executed. But Genesis 40:23 says that yet did not the chief butler remember Joseph, but forgot him. How would we behave if here we had our one hopefully get out of jail free card? We let someone know, hey, I can do more than just languish in a prison house. Just remember me. And then to find out that person didn't give you a second thought. They were happy to receive their freedom. They were happy to receive their reward. But when it came to you, you were simply second nature or not even a thought thereafter. Too often we find ourselves, even in today's society, we help those not so much for the reward, but hoping that they would remember us, only to watch them go on to receive better and better rewards, never giving thanks or even credit to our assistance. What would we do with it? We could get bitter, and yet Joseph did neither. He just sat there wondering what was to become of him. He knew he had a dream where there would be obedience to him. He didn't fully understand it. And there was no one in a prison cell bowing down to him at this point. So he knew it was a future dream. Somewhere, as the butler crossed paths with the Pharaoh, he saw the magicians. He heard the anguish. And it was then that he remembered what had happened. For in Genesis 41:9, then spoke the chief butler unto Pharaoh, saying, I do remember my faults this day. He then went on to tell the Pharaoh of the man in prison that had given interpretation. He remembered how him and the butler, or him and the baker, had been confined, how each had dreams and each received exact interpretation of those dreams. The baker to be executed, him to be re-elevated. In Genesis 41:14-16, it says, Then Pharaoh sent and called Joseph, and they brought him hastily out of the dungeon, and he shaved himself and changed his raiment, and came unto Pharaoh. And Pharaoh said unto Joseph, I have dreamed a dream, and there is none that can interpret it. And I have heard say of thee that thou canst understand a dream to interpret it. And Joseph answered Pharaoh, saying, It is not in me. God shall give Pharaoh an answer of peace. What would we do with our capabilities and abilities? Who do we give the true credit to? How many times have we heard throughout life, I pulled myself up by my own bootstraps? It's not our own bootstraps that we pull ourselves up, but it's the mercy and the grace of God. Those of us with the intelligence to get through college and earn degrees upon degrees, or to understand those things that are oftentimes too great for everyone else. It is not our own understanding. How is it that a person can be born of parents with no education and yet become surgeon generals? Or they can go on to become astronauts, or they can do something great, and yet genetically you would look back and wonder how such a person, or others that are born to great parents, those with financial understanding, to be living under a bridge, strung out, unable to put two sentences together. It's not in their own genetic makeup, but mercies of God. God will give those abilities to those around. What we do with those abilities will then determine how far we go in life. But we must always give thanks to the Lord. And Joseph knew it wasn't him that interpreted the dreams, but it was God that was giving him the interpretation. In Genesis 41:25, it says, "And Joseph said unto Pharaoh, the dream of Pharaoh is one. God hath showed Pharaoh what he is about to do." And then in verse 32, "And for the dream was doubled unto Pharaoh twice. It is because the thing that it is established by God, and God will shortly bring it to pass." We must be willing to listen to God when he's speaking. How he speaks to some is not how he speaks to others. There are those that have said they have heard the voice of God. Personally, I have never. Sometimes I've thought about it, and other times I wise up and think, I don't think so. Some have learned in dreams as they sleep. That tends to be the best way God can talk to me, because at that point I can't argue back. My subconscious willing to listen. There are those that will read scriptures that are written many years ago in every Bible that say the same thing, and yet this particular day it speaks volumes to the reader. Sometimes it's through others. God will talk to your friends, your family, to those that you have put over you, that you look up to, your mentors. It may be a pastor. How many times have we sat in services where a service is going, a message is spoken, and we know that was God's message to us? The Apostle James, writing in 1:5-6, wrote, "If any of you lack wisdom, let him ask of God, that giveth to all men liberally, and upbraideth not, and it shall be given him. But let him ask in faith, nothing wavering. For he that wavereth is like a wave of the sea, driven with the wind and tossed." Too often, God is our last resort. We receive something, we think it's of God, we feel impressed, and yet we'll go to our friends, our family. What do you think? How do you view? God didn't give them the discussion. When we do go to God, we should understand we need to go in faith. God does not want stupid people, but he may not give us all the answer. What would it have cost Abram if God had told them, "I'm pulling you out of the Ur of Chaldees, but yet you're going to wander around the desert over and over and over"? Would Abraham still been faithful and gone on? What if he told Joseph, "Here's the dream of obedience to you, but yet you're going to spend time in Egypt. You're going to spend time in a pit that your brothers are going to dig for you. You're going to spend time in a prison for years upon years until someone finally remembers what Joseph had been as fast to go." We also must remember when we go to God, come in faith, knowing that God is a rewarder to those that seek him diligently, not going as a beggar. How many times do we go to our own earthly father asking for different things? Can I have $1? If we know he has it, he'll faithfully give it. But would the father do the same if we went and begged and not expected? Or if we asked and then said, "Don't worry about it, I know you won't give it to me anyway"? God rewards those who come diligently seeking, desiring to impart knowledge to us so that we could lead successful and blessed lives. Joseph finally told the Pharaoh of the interpretation. As we had read, starting in verse 38, it said, Pharaoh said unto his servants, can we find such a one as this, a man in whom the Spirit of God is? Even the Pharaoh had to acknowledge he was not superior in his own eyes, that his religion had failed him, that the magicians knew nothing, but that Joseph had something that he didn't have. And then he goes to reward Joseph. As much as God hath showed thee, there is none so discreet and wise as thou art. And he rewards him to be over his house. According to his word, his people will be ruled. The only thing he did not give Joseph was the throne, where he stated he would be greater. He set him up over the whole land of Egypt. And as proof, he took off his ring from his hand and gave it to Joseph. He arrayed him in vestures of fine linen. He put a gold chain about his neck, allowing him to ride second chariot, and telling them to bow the knee. He made him ruler over all of Egypt. The only one that was above him was the Pharaoh. We can see through this story that Joseph's life led him to a place of influence. Throughout this chapter, there's the word all, small 3-letter word, but it's all encompassing. It wasn't just a partial thing, for in verse 37, it was all his servants. There was not a servant in Egypt under the Pharaoh that did not owe allegiance to Joseph. In verse 39, it said he showed thee all this. The Pharaoh went out and showed him everything that was under him and said it was going to be his. It wasn't only the servants and those in the immediate rule of Pharaoh, but it was all his people. For in verse 40, it was all my people be ruled. Everyone, those born, those that were living. And in verse 41, it was all the land of Egypt. The Lord knows how to bless us and how to give us good things in due time. But it does take the time. He prepares us. As in cooking, those who can, usually from scratch, it takes a while. They pull the ingredients. They tell you about that mouth-watering feast that you're about to have. But when you first go into the kitchen, all you see is a slab of cold meat, a few vegetables, flour, oil, water. But yet in a chef's hands, it becomes a masterpiece. And the Lord does the same with our life. He doesn't just simply stick a life in a microwave and in 2 minutes you're rewarded. But he has to put forth the flour, maybe a little oil, bitter herbs, maybe some water, stirring it up. But he has something for each and every one of us. Joseph is a good example of what to do while we're getting prepared. It was very easy for Joseph to have gotten bitter. Here he had a dream that he was going to be ruler over his parents, his brothers, and yet all that got him was a well and discussion and hatred of his own family. Here he was in a strange land, young, finally able to be over a household, not having anything forbidden, and yet lied upon and cast into prison. Then he finds himself again in charge of people, able to have some better conditions, even giving dream interpretations to those with him to be forgotten and to be stuck. And finally, he's rewarded. Each step that Joseph went through, it prepared him for his next challenge. All of us have children, or some of us have children. You would not give a baby with no teeth a steak sandwich. You would not hand them the car keys and allow them to get in a vehicle and drive. Ultimately and eventually, you do want that child to enjoy a steak. You do want them to have the mobility that a car allows. But even at 8 and 9, when they're ready to spread their wings, you still watch them and you allow them to mature. And when they're ready, then you reward them with bigger and better things. But with each thing they are rewarded, it helps them meet the next challenge. And each of our lives, God does the same. It is only in hindsight, it seems, that one can realize the blessings and the truth that God was with us. We know that Joseph realized his life was ordered by God. For in Genesis 50 and 20, he finally states, "But as for you, you thought evil against me, but God meant it unto good, to bring to pass, as it is this day, to save much people alive." Joseph didn't see that back when he was under his father's household. All he had was the dream that one day his brothers and perhaps his parents would be bowing down in reverence, giving him an elevation. He did not see that it was not only his parents, but many, many people. He did not see that by going into Egypt, he would ultimately save his family, for there was a famine that came. That is what the Pharaoh was shown. And with that famine, because Joseph was in charge, he used his wisdom to keep stores saved aside just in case this occurred. And he knew it was 7 years for the 7 thin cattle, or the 7 ears. So he was better able to be prepared. And in doing so, when the food ran out, when there was nothing for those around to eat, then his parents, his family was spared. We must remember to remain faithful to God and trust him to order our steps. The psalmist David found in verse 37, or chapter 37, verses 23 through 25, "The steps of a good man are ordered by the Lord, and he delighteth in his way. Though he fall, he shall not be utterly cast down, for the Lord upholdeth him with his hand. I have been young, and now am old, yet have I not seen the righteous forsaken, nor his seed begging for bread." How do we handle our adversity? All too often, we look at it as a meter of our worth. When things go right, then God must be for us. We must be doing something right. We must be doing that which is good. And when things go south, all of a sudden, God hates us. The world's against us. We've made bad choices. We must remember that there is good and bad in every day. Each thing is an opportunity for us to get closer to God. When we are blessed with finances, we can thank God for those finances and seek how we can utilize them. And when the finances dry up, we still can bless God and thank him for the opportunity to realize he is our provider, he is our Father, and that he does mean good things for us. And in all things that we should be able to bless the Lord. It is unfortunate that it is only in old age that many people realize, as David did. Back when he was young, the Lord was with him. He might have been the ruddy boy sitting on the backside of the hills, simply watching small sheep, but it was there that he was able to save the sheep from a lion and then a bear. And it was with confidence that he could stand before the giant Goliath and say, "You come at me with short sword, but I come at you in the name of the Lord. He would not have gotten such a confidence or such a degree of bravado had the Lord simply pulled him off of his duties, put him in a battle, and put him in face of a giant. Each of our life brings trials, and it enables us to then face the next trial. First, we might only face a small lion, a wolf, or something small. And when we find that we have confidence in God, that He has enabled us to get through that trial, then we're ready for the next challenge. And it's in our old age, if we truly look back, we could realize, I have not seen the righteous forsaken, nor his seed begging for bread. I don't know how many meals I have missed, some by choice, some because of foolish financial decisions. However, I can still say I'm standing healthy, full, and then oftentimes robust, more so than I was in times past. The Lord has truly blessed my steps. They were not steps that I may have foresaw, but yet with each part and process, the Lord was faithful to carry us. Hindsight is always 2020. Unfortunately, we see only the present. We look at our present, and if we're not careful, we'll only see the pain. We'll only see the trial. We'll only see the thorns. When you look at a rose bush in the wintertime, it's barren, it's ugly, no leaves, but you clearly see its thorns and its thistles. No flower, no buds. And yet, in the spring and the summer, you notice the beautiful painting that is there. We don't often see the subtlety of God working and writing in our lives until after or later in life when we look back in our hindsight. We must remember each of our lives are like needlework. As a person goes through and puts thread through needle, on one side, all you see is a mess of yarn. There's blacks with blues. There's greens with yellows. There's reds, browns. It's one humbled mess. But yet, when you flip it over, that's when you notice the beautiful picture that was created, the sunset, the sunrise, perhaps even the golden apple. As we go forth this week, let's look back at Joseph's life and examine our own lives. Where are we in our life? Are we sitting under the Pharaoh, enjoying the rewards? Then let us thank God. Or perhaps we're still in the prison house. Once again, let us thank God. He has something for each and every one of us. He does not forsake us, but He is leading and guiding, preparing us, enabling us to face the next challenge. God will often keep a veil over our eyes so that we do trust Him. Only Jesus knew upon birth that there was a cross for death. But how much would we willingly serve God if we knew 3 years later we'd be hung between heaven and earth with those that we trusted, leering and jeering and crying out for our blood? But yet God will keep a veil amongst us. When good things happen to bad people, it does not mean that God is rewarding their wickedness. Perhaps He is simply giving them an opportunity to understand His long-suffering and His blessings. When bad things happen to good people, it does not mean they are being judged and forsaken by God. It could be the time that God is allowing them to grow in trust and enabling them to meet their next challenge. We have the ministry of reconciliation. If we are not hurt ourselves, how could we help hurt people? If we didn't know the bitter sting of harsh words and lies and deceit upon ourselves, how could we effectively minister to those that are hurting? We need the Word of God to strengthen us, to encourage us, and to remind us that He is with us from our birth through our death. And others also need to hear this message. We came out of an Easter season where we realized that God conquered death, hell, and the grave, and it is a great victory and should be celebrated in our life daily. There are those that have already gone on looking forth for the next challenge, the next mountain. But even a mountain climber, when he hits the hill, all he sees is the next mountaintop. He does not see those valleys in between that he has to go through to get to the next mountain. People in this world need to hear that God is still on the throne, that He has conquered death, hell, and the grave, and that ultimately we are victorious, and we should go forth with a victorious lifestyle, not complaining, not worrying. We know from Scripture that the wise man built his house on rock. The foolish man built his on sand. And the rain came, the storms blew, and it was the wise man's house that survived. It did not say that the wise man didn't have rain. God didn't put a barrier between the wise and the foolish. The rains came, the storms blew, but it was the rock or the lack thereof that enabled them to be wise or foolish. People today need to realize, stop looking at just circumstances. Yes, there will be bad rewards to those who make foolish consequences. But sometimes there are bad things that happen even when you do everything right. Joseph kept his integrity. Joseph kept his ways. He did not succumb to Potiphar's wife. He had everything before him, but yet he realized it was not so much against just his master, but it was against God that he would betray the trust. And he kept his integrity, and it cost him even further. He did not get bitter when he spent time after giving the interpretation to those that were in prison with him, though they forgot him. For 2 years he languished past the time. He could have at any time dropped the towel, said, God's forsaken me. I'm undone. This is not worth it. But yet he kept his integrity and eventually was rewarded. We need to go forth remembering Paul writing to the Corinthians in chapter 13, verses 10 and 12. But when that which is perfect is come, then that which is in part shall be done away. For now we see through a glass darkly, but then face to face. Now I know in part, but then shall I know even as also I am known. We don't see everything perfectly. There's still things we'll do expecting different results, and yet they don't go exactly how we plan. But one day, like the needlework, rather than looking at a mess of colors, at a bunch of yarn in knots, God will flip the picture over and show us the beauty that we call life. And we will one day be able to walk with this Lord that has been separated from sin, enjoying the true blessings. And that is what people need to hear this day. Let us remember to come back at 10:15 to see what God has for us this day so that we could further enjoy the blessings, but not only enjoy them, but to share them with others in need.